Everyone. I know it's been a very tough, hard day for all of us, but I'm sure, and I want to welcome you to this side event tonight. And let me also welcome participants that are joining us online tonight. We welcome you. I'm sure that this event, side event, is also going to be very helpful for you. And tonight, as we start our event, we'll have a discussion. And we are focusing on the Malawi post 2021 UNFSS, food politics, governance, accountability of food system actors. And for us to have a very good conversation, we are going to be joined by esteemed panelists from the Ministry of Agriculture and National Planning Commission. And I will be shortly inviting them to in front to help us to have that particular discussion. You will be given time, a chance to also interact with the panelists by way of making some comments, but also asking some questions. So allow me, without much ado, to welcome Dr. Andrew Jamali, who is the Head of Research Management, Policy Analysis, Food Systems, Nutrition, Health, and Population Expert. The introduction itself says it a lot, that it does quite a lot of work. And I'm sure tonight we'll be able to help, it's going to help us to have a very good conversation. So give a round of applause to Dr. Andrew as he comes in front. And again, we'll be having our conversation with the Ministry of representation from the Ministry of Agriculture representing Malawi government. And tonight we have Doshani Kadokera, who is a principal economics under the Ministry of Agriculture, but also is a part of Food System Secretariat in the Department of Planning in Malawi. Welcome, Doshani, in front. Let's give a lot of applause if possible. Because we don't have time, I want to apologize that we started our discussion a bit late because of other logistical arrangements, but I'm sure we'll be able to catch up with time. And I'm also begging our panelists just to stick to the point, come straight to the point, be able to communicate with us very effectively. And I know this is just a discussion, it's not a quiz, but we want to make sure that we have a very good discussion regarding the post-UNFSS, particularly in Malawi. For us to start, I want to engage Doshani. Doshani is representing Malawi government through the Ministry of Agriculture, and he's also part of the Secretariat of the Food System Secretariat in Malawi. And I'm sure he's really a very right person to be able to give us some insights about things that are happening in Malawi in respect to the food systems. And I want to start with you, Doshani, that the post-UNFSS publishing of the national pathways, what steps has government of Malawi taken to advance the national pathways food systems agenda, and how would you describe the progress that we've made so far in ensuring that this plan is being implemented effectively?
All right, thank you so much, Gift, for the question and the insights in terms of the food systems in Malawi. I will start with a brief of background in terms of what exactly we have been doing as a country on the food systems. So I think as per the call by the UN for the food systems, indeed, as a country, we also joined that team of countries to be part of the food systems bandwagon. Basically, we were trying to ensure that we had looked at our food systems and we realized that indeed our food systems were not performing to the expectation as a country. And we had to look into that and do the dialogues. And we did the dialogues from the national level up to the lower level. All in that we are trying to establish our challenges to say why is it that our food system is not working? How can we ensure that our food system is performing to the expectation of the majority of the Malawians? So indeed, we established the challenges and how we can transform our food systems. And from there, we did have a pathways report, which we expect that every stakeholder will be aligning their strategies along that report, which has got almost all sectors in that report. Now, in terms of what are we doing, having had that as our Bible, we are looking forward to say, let's operationalize. We went on the ground, Malawians spoke, they have given us the mandate to say, okay, can you transform our food system by doing this and this and this? So what we want to do is we have to operationalize that. And how are we going to do it? From the government side, looking at all the identified factors and the interventions that are required to transform our food systems, we understand it is a very complex system which requires multi-sectoral approach. And indeed, we want to ensure that we take everyone else on board. We want to move on this journey by ensuring that everyone else has a role to play, because this is not about government, but it's about all of us as a country. Now, so far, post the summit, what we have done is we looked at some commitments, because when we were doing the dialogues, there were some commitments. Stakeholders were coming in to say, okay, when you're moving forward, don't forget us. Take us on board. We'll support this, we'll support this, or just tell us something, we'll do that. So we have put all that into context in terms of saying this one is committing this and this, and we are also reaching out to more in order to ensure that this is being a multi-sectoral as well as multi-stakeholder approach into this. From the government side, we're also expecting that there will be a policy shift in which we expect stakeholders to align along the interventions that were prioritized in the pathways. Why? Because we see this approach, the food systems approach that we're taking, to be the ideal approach for us to achieve our sustainable development goals. Because when you look at all the pathways that are there, they are touching on almost everything that touches on the human existence. And it's very important for us to take a food systems approach in transforming our food systems in the country. So in brief, I can stop there.
Thank you very much, Toshani. And I think you also, in your submission, you alluded to the fact that the process, when you began it in Malawi, you also had a consultation process with the public, and you got some views from Malawians themselves. I should believe that farmers were so involved. But
yes.
Then extension, when you're confirming whether farmers were involved, I also want you just to tell us whether this was not a rubber stamp of the technocrats from the government, because they've been some thinking that sometimes government officials from the Ministry of Agriculture, they would come up with ideas of what they want to see in the strategy, and then just trying to endorse, or window dressing to consult the public. What assurance are there that the input from the people that are there, women, youth, and everyone, including the farmers, has been included in the process?
All right. So thanks so much for that question. Indeed, let me confirm here that our process was very inclusive to ensure that every stakeholder, from the farmers to all the policymakers, are well represented at all levels. And this we did. We ensured that the representation during those dialogues was indeed inclusive, whereby farmer organizations were part and parcel of this this process. And to underscore that, we have got a roadmap which we have put in place. The roadmap states that we start from the national level, whereby we're doing sectoral meetings to ensure that sectors do identify what they're implementing and what are the gaps. And from there, we'll go to a national stakeholder validation, whereby we want to have a framework which can help us in terms of operationalization. And after that, we are also planning for district feedback meetings. Why do we want that? We want to ensure that the ones we consulted do also validate that whatever they told us is what we have put into action to say, this is what we're going to implement. And that's exactly what we want to, because we want to ensure that whenever we're doing this process, we don't leave anyone else behind. So that's the approach that we want to take.
Okay, thank you very much, Doshan. But because I'm still having a discussion with you, you are giving us a very good trajectory showing how Malawi government has started working on this food systems approach in Malawi. And I think to me, it seems that we're making good progress based on what you're saying, but also from the literature that we see. But for you, being in the Secretariat here in Malawi for food systems and also the Ministry of Agriculture, would you say you're happy with the progress that we made so far, or would have done better getting to this level?
Of course, we could have done better in the sense that we have lagged behind in terms of the coordination part. But in terms of the operationalization on the ground, stakeholders are on the ground implementing, responding to the action tracks that were guiding us during the dialogue. So the lagging behind is mainly on coordination in the sense that we may not be able to give a true picture in terms of what is being implemented on the ground, but actions are happening on the ground. But from what we have started now, we are moving in the right direction, and we expect that as a country, we are really going to record the right progress in terms of the operationalization of the pathways that were identified during the food systems dialogues.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lastly, maybe just understand what would you think would be, what is the current most important challenge that you've identified so far that would really affect the process of the implementation of this approach in Malawi? And again, what is it that government is doing to ensure that this is not just a ghost kind of a program or approach, but is a reality?
Yeah, the biggest problem that we have identified from the government side is the coordination. As I indicated earlier on, upon the consolidation of the synthesis report of the food systems, we have seen actions happening on the ground. Stakeholders have taken it up, implementing interventions on the ground. Now, the biggest challenge that we have had is the coordination, whereby we may not be in the loop in terms of who is doing what. And now, having identified that as our biggest challenge from the government side, we have realized that we need a fully fledged coordination hub. Why we need this coordination hub is we want to ensure that everything else that stakeholders are doing is being well coordinated and being reported to a center point. And this coordination hub will be the focal unit for us to ensure that everything else that is happening around the country, even the reporting globally, will be coordinated by this team. And we are reaching out to partners to ensure that this coordination hub is set up, and then we set the ball rolling in order for us to operationalize the pathways that were identified during the food systems dialogues.
Thank you very much. I know that people would want to ask you some questions at a certain point, but one of the questions that I'm expecting people to ask you, but you can also answer now, is a question regarding the flagship programs that Malawi government is actually promoting, has actually launched. There's the mega farms, okay? We have the solar irrigation, mobile extension, and these programs are really have been rolled out. Huge investment is going into these programs. How do you ensure that these are more sustainable? It's not the program that after 5 years, 6 years, then they're all gone. We're talking about sustainability of these programs.
Yes, exactly. So when you look at the rolling out of these programs, we indeed are partnering with some stakeholders in terms of the support, the technical support into all that. But government is taking a very large extent in terms of ownership of operationalizing these initiatives. When you look at the maker farms, I think it's of high interest to government, and there is indeed great ownership that we want to ensure that whenever we are going on the ground, there is a community ownership or a local ownership of that initiative to ensure that the sustainability, whenever that, whether it's a project coming to an end, we are ensuring that the expertise and the knowledge remains within the community to ensure that going forward, those interventions will continue up to the end. That's why when you look at even the agriculture commercialization that we are doing, we are ensuring that farmers are also contributing towards that.
Yeah.
When we're saying we're issuing matching grants, it's just not just giving farmers resources, but they have to contribute to something. Why? We want to instill that that feeling that there is need for us to own whatever interventions that we're trying. So I can assure you that all the interventions that we are putting in place are ensuring that there is ownership. When you look at these, the digital extension, the maker farms, it's just a starting point. Yeah. We have to start from somewhere because we can't roll out all those pathways at once, but we have to start somewhere, and that will lead to the other pathways being implemented.
Thank you very much, Doshan. I don't want to be too mean and just focus on you. I know, we also have a representation from the National Planning Commission, Dr. Jamali. He's busy taking notes, and I'm not sure whether he's taking notes to ask you questions, but he is not having that privilege tonight to ask you questions, because I know he also has to bring his input. But tonight, Dr. Jamali, what do you think should be the multi-sectoral integration, or how should the multi-sectoral integration look like in building sustainable, health, and resilient food systems in Malawi?
Well, thank you so much, moderator, for the panel discussion. I think that's a loaded question, but it speaks to the whole complexity associated with the food systems analysis. If you look at the food systems framework itself, it's got multi-sectoral players, right? You're talking about production, and there are so many players in the production chain. We're talking about processing, and then we're talking about distribution. Finally, we'll be talking about consumption. Now, the mistake that we can make is to think that food systems is about food only. Food systems is not only about food. Actually, food is the end game when it gets on the table and on the plate. Each and every component of the food systems framework has got different players doing different things, but in a coordinated fashion that is supposed to be there. When you look at this production itself, you're talking about seed producers, you're talking about plant breeders, you're talking about land issues, you're talking about all sorts of inputs that are required for a farmer or a producer to be able to come up with something from the farm. The same applies in the other facets, in the other categories of the food systems framework. What that entails is there is need for a very consistent coordination mechanism to be put in place. And Doshan has already mentioned that talking about coordination of the food systems is one of the key challenges in the meantime.
Yes.
What do we mean? If you are to ask myself or even Doshani to explain where we are with regards to the food systems programming in Malawi, it will be very difficult to really outline which key players are playing what role as of now. We know that there's a whole group doing, production, others are doing seed manufacturing, others are doing, trading, and so on and so forth, distribution. But the key issue is, where are we as we speak now? It's very difficult. Because we will need to have a robust system that will help us to track each and every intervention in each of these 4 blocks that I've talked about. And I've just simplified the version, but it's quite complex when you look at that. Now, getting to your question, the issue is how best should we be looking at the issue of coordinating the food systems? I mean, that speaks for itself. We need to have an independent entity that is having a bird's eye view over how the whole system is actually coordinated, how it is synergizing to make sure that food is on the table. And you might want to also consider the fact that food systems may not only have the dynamics to play within the national borders. There are complete set of dynamics that are operating across the borders.
Yes.
I mean, to the case in point would be the Russia-Ukraine war now, which disrupted, the supply chains, affecting, farm inputs and so on and so forth. That's part of the food system. And so the issue of coordination stands to be key when we look at the framework in place by clearly outlining what each of the key stakeholders in the key blocks are doing,
yes,
at what point, and what kind of challenges they are actually confronted with, and how best we can troubleshoot to make sure that there's that kind of seamless operationalization of the food systems program in Malawi. So I've talked about an independent entity that should have a bird's eye view. The Minister of Agriculture here, yes, it's well placed to do that, but you can talk about trade issues, because some of the food has to be traded. Okay, after production, it has to be processed. You're talking about a different sector. That's industrialization sector, where the Ministry of Trade and Industry comes into play. And then there's the issue of irrigation systems, where we're talking about energy, okay, to provide the power that should, power all those, irrigation, technologies that are out there. For him to ask questions to the Minister of Industry and the Minister of Energy and the Minister of Mining and request all sorts of kind of reports about how they are contributing to the overall functionability of the food system programs, that's something that's a big ask. And I talk about, I'm saying that because I'm in the government sectors. It's not easy because each one of them have got their own core mandate to which they are actually expected to deliver. So much so that when they look at food systems, they look at it as a side kind of activity in that regard.
Yes.
So bringing that into context, the idea is to make sure that we have got an institution or a mechanism that is in place that has got the power to convene all these people and ask hard questions to say, why are we not performing in this fact, in this area? What is the challenge and how best can we brainstorm on those kind of challenges? So the issue of coordination stands to be very key. Why? Because you cannot talk about integration without the coordination lever that should be in place.
Yeah.
I think in a nutshell, I'll leave it there for the time being.
Thank you very much, Doctor. But before you go, I still have a couple of questions follow up to make based on your submission. In passing, you mentioned about, or you tried to educate us that food systems is not just about food. Okay, and that's why you also agree with Doshani that that's why the food systems approach in Malawi requires a lot of stakeholders to be involved. But do you think, as National Planning Commission, we've done enough to raise awareness that these stakeholders that you're talking about are really aware of the approach, the food systems approach in Malawi?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. You see, as a planning commission, we have two key mandates that we should deliver on. First of all is to craft the long-term vision of this country, like a long-term development framework, which we did in 2020, right? By coming up with a vision for Malawi 2063, where we're looking at becoming an inclusively wealth and self-reliant nation by 2063. And of course, operationalizing the vision in 10-year phases, the first 10-year implementation plan, which is already underway, looking at two key milestones: graduating Malawi to become a lower middle income economy and also meeting most of the sustainable development goals. The second mandate of the commission is to oversee implementation of all those programs that have been prioritized within the medium to long-term range. That is our mandate. And we have to play within the mandate. The key issue now is, how are we doing, how are we addressing the issues to do with food systems like you put in place within the confines of our mandate?
Yes.
That's a very good question. You see, when I look at food systems, it's actually touching across various pillars and enablers of Malawi 2063. I'll talk about the first pillar, which is agriculture, productivity, and commercialization. So we come in agriculture, productivity, and commercialization. Productivity for what? Productivity so that Malawi can become self-sustaining in terms of food. Productivity so that Malawi can produce as much, which can provide raw materials with value-added, interventions to spin up commercialization of agriculture. So that's where we come in. So every time we are engaging stakeholders in the development space that are operating programs under this particular pillar,
yes,
we talk about the necessity of making sure that there is a food systems component associated with their programming. Why? It's food systems that is addressing most of the challenges that Malawi is talking about. If you look at the food systems continuum, like I've said earlier on, you'd see that issues of commercialization are coming in under the distribution entity or the distribution block. That's where commercial entities are coming in. If you look at issues to do with productivity, That's where the production, framework, the production block of the framework we are talking about is actually being featured much more. So agriculture productivity and commercialization is already taking two key components within the food systems, commercialization bit as well as the production bit. When you look at the pillar of urbanization,
Yes.
apart from looking at infrastructure development, we're also looking at making sure that we have viable urban, public services that should be put in place. And that talks to the issue of improved transport infrastructure, which speaks to commercialization, because when you produce, you want to commercialize, there should be a proper transport system in place. There should be ICT development in place to enhance marketing processes. Within that aspect, we are already engaging in discussion to do with food systems. In other words, as we are operationalizing the first 10-year implementation plan,
yes,
in a nutshell, we are also talking about addressing the food systems issues, which Malawi is actually undertaking within this particular program. I could go further to talk about the enabler of enhanced, economic infrastructure, private sector dynamism, where we are looking at all players that have to be involved in making sure that the food systems program is functioning in Malawi. So in every space that we are engaging with stakeholders, these issues are always embedded in to make sure that we are talking the same language in as far as development is concerned.
The interesting thing is that both of you are coming from government, and you are speaking in unison as a choir, which is really good, giving a very good dimension of what is going on. But Dr. Jamal, would you just isolate just two key gaps that you've identified in the process that you think really need to be focused at the moment? We cannot wait until next month, but we need to focus on them now and be able to address them. And how do we address them?
Well, I wouldn't say that there are gaps, because talk about coordination, if I'm to speak about it, the ministry is doing that, but the question now is the effectiveness of the coordination. Just last week ago, we were having some discussions with stakeholders on the food systems. And my own observation was the fact that I don't think there is efficient coordination in that regard. What do I mean? We don't seem to know in a comprehensive format what each of these key players are actually contributing. We need, first of all, to package each of these actors in key building blocks of the Malawi's food systems, so that we are able to look at what programs are within each key block and how do these blocks speak to each other to contribute to the overall food systems transformation that we're talking about in Malawi.
Yes.
Again, when you talk about food systems transformation, you look at each of the 4 blocks that I mentioned, just among the few. What are the transformational issues that each of these blocks is actually addressing? When you talk about consumption,
yes,
you're talking about nutrition, you're talking about health, you're talking about diets, you're talking about all those kinds. What is the status of diets in Malawi that needs transformation? What is the status of food production in Malawi that needs transformation? If this message is clearly understood by each of the key players, then we'll be asking the next set of questions is, what kind of programmatic interventions are in place for that? And again, finally, one of the elements that I can speak to in terms of pretty much not necessarily gaps, but something that needs to be fine-tuned is a proper monitoring and evaluation framework. And even monitoring, evaluation, and learning framework. That's right. That should keep us on the toes to say, we are tracking production. We talk about mega farms, we're talking about cooperatives, we're talking about how are each of these elements, these kind of interventions, knitting together to make sure that Malawi is able to produce enough for itself and enough for the industries that are hungering for raw materials, for the processing and stuff like that.
Yes.
So I'm speaking to 2 issues there. Yeah. I'm speaking to the issue of a robust M&D framework.
Yes.
Actually, monitoring, evaluation, and learning framework that should keep us on the toes to track how we are progressing with this. I'm also speaking to the issue of coordination, which I mentioned earlier, but over and above that, the issue of resources. You see, it's very easy to talk about food systems, but we could have a lot more key players in the system that are operating in one area, and the resources are actually skewed to a particular area, leaving other areas. I may ask, infrastructure. Do you have a clear picture as to how the road network, investments with regard to food systems are operating in the country? I'm not so sure yet.
Thank you.
Okay, so there could be so many other things.
Yes.
Resource mobilization and allocation are all the building blocks of Malawi's food systems equally resourced or rightly resourced, so that we should be talking about the whole system operating in a direction of progress, or others actually underperforming because of all those kind of systematic challenges to do with resources.
So we're talking about the resources. Do you think we've got enough capacity, enough resources to be able to, to undertake all these recommendations that you're making?
Yeah, I mean,
what is the government's commitment? But of course, Dashani, you can also jump in terms of financing this. what has been the government's commitment towards the financing of this process?
Yeah, so issues of resources will never be enough. I mean, everywhere in the world, resource constraints are there. And now that, the global world is actually experiencing all this set of economic challenges, that would be the normal talk. But I wanted to say that when we talk about resources, we can talk about resource mobilization, but we first of all need to know, did we discuss or have we come up with a clear picture of answering the question of what kind of resource base and resource input is required to deliver this kind of food systems transformation in Malawi?
Yes.
Looking at all those building blocks,
yes,
what will it take to have resources that will actually deliver the much desired food systems transformation that we're talking about? And that's a question of design. That's a question of concept, which we need. As at now, as we're talking about operationalizing this system, the food systems program, we need to be addressing those kind of issues. But we cannot do that until we know how each of the building blocks, each of the key sectors that are operating this are actually trying out their trade in terms of operationalizing the system, food systems programming in the country.
Okay. Yes, Toshan, you want to add on the financing? Do we expect what is the Malawi government's commitment, or do we expect some foreign support towards this, or this is something that you're going to own as Malawi government?
Yeah, so I think we have to look at the operationalization of the food systems not to be a government centered. Government will be as a player as well within that field. So we have to look at it with that picture whereby every player should be contributing something. Already government, as I indicated, there's already a shift in terms of policy. The current strategies, projects that are being developed, they're being aligned along the lines of food systems. But I think the key point is what Dr. Jamali indicated, that we need to spread those resources across the sectors. We don't want to have a scenario whereby all our projects are addressing nutrition issues, and then we end up with an infrastructure sector which is not being developed. And then you are producing surpluses in an area where you cannot even move it to a market. So we have to balance up, balancing up where we are implementing these interventions in trying to address the food system, so that when other stakeholders are improving the nutritional side, others are working on the processing side, value addition, so that we are getting more in terms of, rather than just exporting the raw materials. On the other side, others are working on the infrastructure, the market infrastructure, the roads are being improved. On the other side, we are no longer relying on hydro only. We are looking at renewable energy and how we can improve on all that. So I think it's, as indicated, it's a multi-sectoral approach, which we have to ensure that we move on with that approach, with that mentality going forward.
Thank you very much. Food systems is not about government of Malawi, but it's for everyone and all the stakeholders. And I think we look forward to the successive implementation of these pathways. And we're coming to that note. We have come to the end of our panel discussion tonight. And it's been really a very great day for us to be able to learn one or two things from the two gentlemen from National Planning Commission and from the Malawi government through the Ministry of Agriculture. I also want to thank the participants that participated online and those that have participated physically here, because today has been a very intense day. It's been a busy day, but you made it a point that it should also be part of this discussion. But the dialogue that we began now, it doesn't mean that it has to end here. You have an opportunity to interact with Dr. Wizie, Dr. Jamali, as well as Doshani, to actually discussing and asking the questions. They're good people. They'll be able to give you good responses. I want to thank you very much and have a good night. Thank you very much.